Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's program brought to you by the U.S. Botanic Garden. My name is Courtney Burris, the online education specialist with the Learning and Outreach team here at the Garden. We're so happy to have you joining us for a book talk this morning, Paint Like a Butterfly with Brinton Jaecks. Jean is a plein air artist and gardener inspired by all the remarkable creatures that inhabit her 2-acre sanctuary. After Jean received her BFA from Maryland Institute of College of Art, she was honored with the institution's Alfred and Trafford Klotz International Artist Residency in Brittany, France. Her Master of Fine Arts thesis at George Washington University, A Garden Near and Far, celebrated her garden. She has been influenced by witnessing the monarch butterfly migrations in Cape May, New Jersey, and Pacific Grove, California. The plight and decline of that transcendent migrator prompted her book, Paint Like a Butterfly. Jean taught painting for 20 years at the U.S. Botanic Garden in partnership with the Corcoran College of Art and Design in Washington, D.C., at St. John's College in Annapolis, at the National Arboretum, and at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you, Courtney,
Hi,
for
Jean. Good
the
morning.
introduction. That was so kind of you. And I'd like to thank you for all your support and also for Grace Anderson in assisting with this event this afternoon. Thank you. And
It's our
thank you
pleasure.
for being here. I can't see who you are, but thank you for joining us this morning. Okay. Paint Like a Butterfly is a painted memoir of my organic, native, sustainable garden. My book begins with the winter solstice and ends at the winter solstice, although my story begins in 1962 and continues to the present. Last summer, my husband and I were enjoying a birthday luncheon with friends. The gentleman was celebrating his 103rd birthday when our guest leaned forward with a thoughtful expression and said, "I am an 8-year-old boy in the front row, and I raise my hand to ask you, Miss Brinton Jaecks, how do you paint like a butterfly?" And I will tell you the story. Liquid light. Winter is the essence of landscape for me. The bare bones of summer woods, now revealed in natural simplicity, remind me that art was the first language on earth expressed in the same way we create today. We use the same tools and materials, natural hair brushes rather than wads of fur, charcoal from the burnt willow, ink from walnuts and berries, silver and gold to express the angled sun, dry earth, ochres, raw sienna, and burnt sienna, first discovered when sienna clay left too close to the fire, mellowed to a beautiful warm cinnamon hue. All of this scumbled and scrubbed across the surface creates texture and form and many beautiful layers of winter. To draw a subject is to know it intimately. The line caresses the form just as snow blankets the fields, revealing each hollow and divot and rise and fall of the landscape. Winter is all line, composition, texture, and value. I painted this liquid light was painted the morning after an ice storm. I was facing east and the garden was backlit, the stained glass effect, as I call it. Painting is more than what you see. How do you express the light and the brilliance of the light? The crackling of the ice falling from the pine trees, the bird song, and discovering who passed by in the evening, all infused in the painting. The foreground is very liquidy, and that's why I called it liquid light. I add brushed water across the front of the composition, and those shadows were so luminous and light, and that's why I called it liquid light. I just dropped color in and let it infuse. Red twig. Red twig dogwood adds a dramatic, rich color to the winter landscape. The red twig holds the snow and glows against the cool blue-white pines. My winter garden remains wild with hydrangeas, Joe Pye weed and shrubs, and grasses left uncut for birds to forage and overwintering bees and insects to find warm lodging until spring. Snow enhances the beauty of the natural landscape and creates a more interesting silhouette. Raking leaves and cleaning your garden in autumn disturbs and eliminates pollinators, insects, and habitats for small animals that find safe havens until the weather warms. Protecting pollinators ensures that our vegetables and plants, fruit trees, and gardens will thrive the following spring and summer. And this is a painting that I did en plein air, capturing the beauty of the uncut landscape. To me, it's much more interesting to see the beauty of the snow laying on the trees and branches. Winter bones. My journey begins with the winter solstice, the shortest day of the calendar. At noon on this day, shadows are the longest they will be for the entire year. The character of the bare trees is revealed without the finery of summer green, each branch illuminated in silvery tracings of reflected light. Textures abound in the dry plants and pods, each so interesting and intricate. Small seeds like these hold the DNA for every plant on Earth. Vines particularly fascinate me in the winter landscape. The succulent leaves disintegrate, leaving behind woody tendrils with curls and flourishes we may have missed in the summer. Below them, birds forage, scratching away at leaf and bracken, unearthing all manner of insect and seed. This painting of the winter bones of my landscape was painted on handmade tinted paper. Bird's nest. Winter is also discovery. I passed in an exquisite little work of art 100 times and never noticed it concealed in the summer foliage. In mid-December, I found this beautifully designed combined medium assemblage in a very large hydrangea bush, snuggled in a forked branch with the nest suspended below. How extraordinary for this tiny unknown bird to weave a conformed circle in fine threads of dry grass, supported on the outside by intertwining bits of paper, dried leaves, rose petals, and leaf skeletons. Miraculous to imagine a tiny beak gathering, spinning, and creating this perfect structure to house her eggs, small chicks, and their nesting parents. There is much to discover in the winter landscape. Crow. Crows are the perennial watchers of the bird kingdom. They pass through our garden almost always in small flocks, and once they've established that the coast is clear, they like to congregate at the base of the bird feeders. This wary, wet afternoon sentinel perched on the cupola of the gazebo, a well-placed lookout. Whether out of curiosity or tenacity, he sat for a long time, hunched over, surveying the yard, seeming oblivious of the cold and wet. His posture encouraged me to paint this very welcome visitor to the garden. In the background behind the crow are white pines that we planted 40 years ago in our garden, and it's a perfect habitat for animals. Hyacinth and Snowdrops. Hyacinth and Snowdrops was painted in egg tempera on calfskin vellum with silver leaf arches. These beautiful flowers are harbingers of spring and warmer days to come. This particular tempera has an interesting story. After 20 hours of painting with thin glazes of egg tempera, I stood my drawing board up on a low bench in my studio to observe details. The next morning, I packed up my materials for a class at the U.S. Botanic Garden, including my unfinished tempera of hyacinths. I was taking the painting with me to discuss the technique with my students, but something wasn't right. The lower half of the painting was gone. Only a pale ghost of color remained. Totally baffled, I pieced together the mystery when Ash, my standard poodle, skulked out of the room with a very guilty look on her face. It seems she found the taste of fresh egg yolk and animal skin irresistible. I've since learned that all paintings, regardless of medium, retire to a high tabletop for safekeeping. These techniques that I taught at the Botanic Garden for many years are the same techniques artists would have used for creating medieval manuscripts. The vellum that I purchased also was created in the same way that it would have been prepared 400 years ago. April flowers. April flowers is painted on a watercolor on paper. My April garden is filled with crystalline early morning light, inviting buds like tiny little tongues to poke through the earth and leaves. Camellias open their firm, round coats slightly to the unfolding of fragile, salmon-colored petals and golden interior. Blue-tailed skinks skitter from fieldstones and die between the layers of winter leaves. The early spring azure butterfly and mosquito hawk remind me that the earth is warming and welcoming the sleeping creatures to awaken and seek spring nectar. Winter seems so far when only days before the garden was resting. So I'm just seeing in my garden this morning that the camellias are coming out. We've seen the skinks diving, and there's lots of bees in the garden. And April is just around the corner. Bluebird. The bluebird carries the sky on his back. Henry David Thoreau. April is when the bluebirds arrived in my childhood garden each year. My dad built bluebird houses following the Audubon specs from Lawrence Zelny's book, The Bluebird, which still sits on my studio shelf. My parents shared their bluebird boxes with their neighbors in hopes of creating our own bluebird trail. We felt a quiet exuberance each spring when the azure blue male with his bright orange breast returned with his more subtle earthy gray blue and soft sienna mate. Our bluebirds are already nesting for this year, and we have usually 5 to 10 in the backyard every morning, which is always the best sight. The aerial view of my garden. Early August, several years ago, my pollinator gardens were filled with butterflies. A female monarch had emerged earlier that day in the rondelle bed, nectared for quite a while, and then flew up over the house. Apparently finding little nectar in the area, she reappeared a short while later, retracing her flight to my garden. That inspired me to create an archipelago of native pollinator gardens over our 2 acres to support the many garden creatures. When I visit reliable native garden centers, insects have guided me to the most desirable host plants and nectar plants and bushes. They are certain natives that are abuzz with a myriad of butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, moths, and wasps, including milkweed, monarda, swallowtail fennel, Coreopterus, Echinacea purpura, agastache, Verbena bonariensis, mountain mint, Seldega, New England aster, hydrangea, arborescens, Joe Pye weed, buttonbush, and spicebush. These are the first and most reliable choices for my pollinators. The aerial view is done in watercolor, and it illustrates the native flowers, bushes, and trees in amber and pink that are pollinator-friendly islands that provide nectar from late February to November. The border that you see are white pines. There are 250 that we planted 40 years ago. They were about 1 inch tall, and now they're 70 feet tall, and they're a perfect habitat for wildlife coming and going to our garden. A Latvian Easter. My grandparents were born in Latvia, and I grew up in a house where Latvian was a second language. My mother continued many of the old world traditions that she had learned as a child. Each Easter, we gathered flowers and herbs from our yard and garden, especially violets, buttercups, and parsley. We placed the blossoms and leaves around the eggs, nestled them in onion skins, and gently wrapped each one in cheesecloth before boiling. This year, I added a natural red pigment for my garden. After wrapping the eggs in cloth, we placed them in water filled with red cabbage leaves, allowed them to boil for 10 minutes, and left the eggs in the red cabbage water in the refrigerator overnight. Next morning, when the eggs were unwrapped, we saw that the flowers and herbs left a silhouette. The red cabbage turned the eggs a beautiful azure blue. You can gently rub the eggs with olive oil for a subtle luster. I painted a sanderling my mother had created in memory of Mary Brinton for sharing the knowledge and love of her family traditions. And if you look at the eggs, as we had unwrapped them, you can see the violets and other flowers and a little bit of parsley in the blue eggs. Siberian iris. One morning, my friend Jane came across the road pushing a wheelbarrow. In it, thin, elegant, reedy stems massed together in clumps. "These are the Siberian iris you've admired in my garden, and I want to share," she said in her characteristic "this is what we're going to do" voice. This beautiful Eurasian native is elegant with its fine, tall, rich green stalks and deep blue-violet flower heads held tightly by translucent celadon sepals. Before the flower emerges, the bud and narrow stems resemble an anhingus bird as the plant reaches for the light and with its snake-like determination. The Japanese artist Ogata Korin's exquisite folding screen of Siberian iris have influenced artists for years. I find that I share with many friends and gardeners and family members. Some of the plants I have in my garden are 40 or 60 years old from my mother's and my grandmother's gardens. And I feel like whenever they come up, I feel like my friends are coming and family are coming back to life for the season. Water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is a beautiful periwinkle blue blossom attached to shiny green leaves held up by buoyant bulbous nodules. Nodules was one of the first aquatic plants I added to my pond. I was attracted to the way the hyacinth sailed back and forth across the water. Very soon, this beautiful tropical plant consumed my water garden. With research, I found it was an invasive species and the beauty was short-lived. I painted water hyacinth on a rainy June morning as part of my MFA thesis exhibit, A Garden Near and Far, at George Washington University, where I designed, planted, cultivated my garden, painted it, and wrote about it. To express the rain that was falling, I added salt to the background. You can see in the upper right section of the painting, I added very, very thick paint. I sprayed table salt across. I waited for it to dry and lifted it, and it expressed the sense of the raindrops. Deutzia. Deutzia is a beautiful May-flowering small shrub named after the 18th century Dutch patron of botany, Johann van der Deutz. The Peka Garden Spring Sale offered this exquisite pollinator, bee, and butterfly-friendly plant. I painted Deutzia in moonlight with shell gold stars and a border of 23-carat raised gold leaf. The tiny golden mayfly resting on the leaf is painted with shell silver and shell gold. Shell gold is painted from the medieval practice of using seashells to hold paint and gold while painting. The luminous white shrub glows at twilight and surrounds my small angel bird bath. Light pollution is a problem for many nocturnal insects, including mayflies, moths, and fireflies, as light disrupts natural processes. And I can never pass by a mussel shell on a beach without picking it up or thinking about how gold and silver was stored in pigment during medieval times in these beautiful little shells. Paper wasp. Paper wasp was painted on handmade paper. Insects responded to the warm spring days of April 2020. Harry and I too emerged from our warm home to enjoy lunch on the deck. Very soon, a handsome paper wasp joined us on the seasoned pine table, and we watched as she slowly cut fibers from the surface of the wood, rolling them in tiny tubes. Prior to the 1850s, European paper makers used cotton rag, which was expensive and limited in quantity. The Chinese had long since made paper utilizing bamboo and mulberry, which are difficult to find in the West. René Lemaire, a French scientist, discovered that the North American wasps created nests of paper using wood fiber and saliva. With that discovery, the wood pulp industry was born. This exquisitely structured copper insect with long jointed legs and armored sleek physique peels back thin slivers of wood like a sculptor with her chisel, rolling them in neat curls. At the nest, the other workers chew the chips into saliva slurry, creating the pulp with which they construct their intricate paper honeycombs under eaves and abandoned bird boxes. These creatures are the original paper makers, inspiring generations for 300 years. And this morning, I have seen dozens of them fly by my window. Nature will bear the closest inspection. She invites us to lay our eye level with her smallest leaf and take an insect view of its plane. Henry David Thoreau. kohlrabi in raised beds. My parents were organic gardeners beginning in 1962, long before it was popular and prior even to Chez Panisse and many of the California trends that set the stage for the wave of healthy gardening that spread across the country. We read Silent Spring by local author Rachel Carson, and it affected us all deeply and most thankfully. We took her prophecies to heart. With organic composting and nothing is ever wasted philosophy, ours was a true chemical-free garden. My dad believed that you should combine soils to enrich the garden, so we gathered mushroom soil from Kennett Square, salt marsh hay from our friends in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, cow manure from the Naval Academy Dairy Farm, and on and on. Our garden was prolific, and we shared with friends and neighbors as they did with us. I recognized even then that our vegetables tasted saltier and earthier than grocers or even farmers market, all grown with chemical fertilizer. The bulbous kohlrabi, it's a very interesting shape, I think, but the leaves are about 3 feet tall, so it occupies a lot of space in your garden. But you can saute the kohlrabi itself, tastes sort of nutty, and we usually eat it raw, but you can saute the leaves like you would kale. Wild violets. Wild violets flourish in the grassy areas of our lawn. They are the only host plant for the fritillary butterfly, so each spring when their beautiful violet heads bow in the grass, we stake off a large area where they are most prolific and avoid mowing for a couple of months to ensure that the caterpillars that have overwintered in the soil below can safely feed and grow. When the adult fritillary emerges later in the summer, they have a smorgasbord of joe pye, wild bergamot, and coneflowers to nectar on. Wildflowers flourish in pesticide-free lawns, adding beauty and color to your yard and supporting an array of the most exquisite birds, bees, butterflies, and other pollinating insects. To paint this, I scooped up a section of the wild violets and placed them in a terracotta saucer and painted the conversation. They just look like they're having a conversation. I love the way they move and reach towards one another. Luna moth. Just before dawn one morning, we discovered a female luna moth on our doorbell, apparently attracted to the light. She rested for quite a while before flying off. Her wings were a translucent pale viridian, vivid and luminous, with 2 large eye spots on each set of wings and long trailing tails on her hind wings. Her body was a feathery white. Luna moths are considered Saturnid silk moths. They have a short lifespan, just 1 week to find a mate and reproduce. A week after we saw her, we found a plump golden luna moth caterpillar climbing up our red maple tree. The name Luna is derived from the Roman moon goddess. In celebration of the Roman goddess, I gilded a 23-karat gold moon encircling this lovely morning visitor. And what a surprise to see her, and I just felt like she needed the golden moon behind her. Carpenter bee on Monarda. The Monarda in my garden are heirloom plants from my mother's garden. The silhouettes of these bee balm beauties inspire me to paint them. And what I found very interesting, I'm going, to garden centers and other gardens. I find that my silhouettes are just almost like firecrackers, and they're so expressive, these beautiful blossoms, and the bees and butterflies and hummingbirds love them. So I wondered if it was because they were heirloom plants. I don't really know the variety of them, but they are very special in my garden. Evening primrose. My garden is a gathering place for all things wild in all seasons. Within this beautiful world of gardening, planting seeds and organizing is another world that plans their lives around this space and creates beauty to its liking. And so my garden really is not entirely my garden. Nature undoubtedly has different intentions. As I pass through this space, I observe the new art forms that the natural world spins, weaves, and lets fly. Evening primrose is blooming in the foreground, and I painted this at twilight, and the light was really soft, and it gave me this effect of a stained glass window with little tesserades of light and color. Painting the heirloom garden. Where I'm standing is right in front of the pergola, and I'm painting the garden that you were looking at just a moment ago there. So I'm under the pergola, and there I am. This is mid-August. My garden in late summer is a tumble, and the pollinator party continues until early autumn. The beds are abuzz and filled with birds, pollinators, and wandering wildlife, and never inspiration to paint. So you can see our white pines in the background. The little white pines 40 years ago that were 1 inch tall are now, just a wonderful habitat for so many animals. And my garden is just flourishes in late summer, and just a joy to be in and a joy to paint. Eastern tiger swallowtail and Joe Pye. Eastern tiger swallowtails are beautiful golden butterflies and frequent my garden and are especially attracted to Joe Pye weed. Joe Pye is a favorite native plant, and I propagate it in all my gardens. I purchased this little Joe at the Pecos Spring Flower Market. The accompanying nursery tag described it as a small variety with mature plants ranging from 2.5 to 3 feet. But within a few months, little Joe stood 10 feet tall, and its stalks bending over the weight of the large rose madder pink flower heads. With research, I found that Richard B. Price and James Pringle discovered that Joe Pye weed's namesake was Joseph Shaquathaquat, a highly regarded Mohican shaman who lives in western Massachusetts. He is known to have treated typhoid and other illnesses using Joe Pye weed and other herbal remedies. I realize now just how much there is to learn and how our gardens hold the discoveries of many centuries of history and lore. My hardy Joe attracts a great variety of butterflies and bees and moths. Overwintering bees bury down in the large hollow stems. In early spring, I cut the stems within a foot of the ground and lay the long branches between the white pines to allow the late bees and insects to emerge as the temperature warms. I painted this beautiful because of the translucent eastern tiger swallowtail, but also just because of the personality and gestures. Watching them nectar is just really such a joy and a wonder in my garden every day. The hornworm. The summer of 2020, while COVID still raged, we were content gardening and painting in our pollinator sanctuary. The Campari tomatoes were abundant, and as I was picking them for a caprese salad, I discovered several plump hornworms with what appeared to be pieces of rice attached to their backs, devouring my plants. My first instinct was to pick them off, but the curious attachment caused me to pause and Google the manifestation. The white protrusions were parasitic wasp eggs, which, if left alone, emerged to devour the hornworm. No need for chemicals or squashing of insects. This natural process in the garden that is organically compost and insecticide-free provides a much preferred solution. So it was so interesting to see this. I guess I'd probably seen it before, but don't remember. But the next morning, the little hornworm was dried up and brown. Brood X cicadas. May of 2021 brought an overabundance of cicadas. They emerged with large reddish eyes and red-brown wing veins. Our standard poodle Zoe was captivated by these creatures as she dove through the air to enjoy her share of the prize. After the female lays her eggs in branch slits, the white nymphs emerge and drop to the ground to bury themselves for 17 years. The next batch will arise in 2038. Cicadas are beneficial to the environment, and they aerate the soil, are a food source for birds, and add nutrients to the soil as they decompose. I painted these beautiful creatures with wings that glisten amber and silver in sunlight, using shell gold for the luminous parts of the body and wings. I had so many specimens in the backyard that, and I keep them, I have a specimen box where I keep all the specimens that I work from. Moonflower glow. Opening the moonflower seed packet, I found what appears to be small pieces of rugged quartz. I nick the corner of the odd seed and soak it in warm water overnight. Then, as I do each year, I wait for the tiny green sprout, which seems to take longer than I remember. The wait is totally worth it. The vine grows quickly up a narrow wrought iron pyramid, curling and turning tight around the support. The flower emerges as a long white tortilla spiral shell. At twilight, the moonflower begins to quiver, and the shell unfolds to a beautiful articulated flower with 5 pale celadon green ridges radiating from the center. The edges of the flower are softly rounded, resembling a silken parachute laid on the grass. The moonflowers are fragrant and draw moths and bats. This was a beautiful evening, and it was the largest turnout of moonflowers. And with the wonderful listening to the crickets at night and the starry light and the lanterns, it was a wonderful subject for me to paint. This was oil on panel. Nymphaea. 29 years ago, we added an aquatic garden. There are 2 100-gallon ponds, one higher, feeding over a waterfall, into the other. We have planted lotus, water lilies, iris, and will add pickerel weed this year. The water garden was conceived as part of my George Washington University MFA thesis, A Garden Near and Far. In the spring, the bullfrog courts his lady, serenading sleep each evening in harmony with the peepers. Our mosquito numbers are lower due to the activity of a myriad of spectacular dragonflies, swamp darners, and mosquito hawks. These acrobatic flyers with their dashing metallic colors and remarkable forms bring life and beauty to our garden. Often perching on flowers or garden ornaments, they are a quiet gift to the garden's activity. This was unusual painting in a way because it was painted on elephant-sized watercolor sheet, which is very large, 29 inches by 40 inches. So as I was sketching, I laid it on the brick patio just beside the water garden and had to sort of jump across back and forth to try to get the luminosity and the color and the light and to keep the color flowing. So I used very large 3-inch brushes for this painting. Swamp darner. This is one of the swamp darners that I found next to a beautiful stone in my garden, my water garden. Swamp darner was painted on handmade paper. I used shell gold and iridescent blue and green pigment with very translucent layers of watercolor. Bullfrog, watercolor on paper. In late August, a handsome sedentary male bullfrog sits resting on a lily pad in my aquatic garden. His dark chin and the size of his tympanium, or external ear, give way to his sex. In males, the tympanium is larger than the eye. As my fish count has fallen over the preceding month, I suspect that this well-fed specimen is the culprit. The days are growing cooler, and he will soon bury himself in the mud in the nearest compost pile until spring arrives. In early April, he will emerge and sing croaking song to once again attract mates. The goldfish will scatter, and the circle of life will continue. He was just a joy to paint. He was huge, and he was also, I painted him on tinted handmade paper, and that's why you see the deckled edge. Metamorphosis. Painted with shell gold and gold leaf on tinted paper. My fascination with and passion for pollinators and pollinator gardening came with a surprise discovery during a visit to Cape May, New Jersey in the fall of 1990. The Audubon Society was tagging butterflies at Cape May Point. There I found volunteers applying tiny numbered stickers to these delicate orange-winged creatures. Each year, warmed by the sun and following their own internal GPS, the long-lived Methuselah monarchs making this improbable journey over 3,000 miles to their winter gathering place in the Oyamo fir forest in central Mexico. These monarchs are an indelible memory for me. From this moment came the inspiration to create my own pollinator garden to support monarchs and other species of butterflies, as well as a variety of bees and other pollinating insects. Moreover, it was this witnessing this miracle of nature, that planted the seed that was to become Paint Like a Butterfly. Monarch butterflies are now threatened at every stage of their migration. Deforestation and climate change have devastated the Oyamo fir forest. Insecticides sprayed to minimize crop damage and control mosquitoes kills millions of monarchs every year. Milkweed, the only host plant on which the caterpillars feed, is rapidly disappearing along their flyways due to suburban development, roadside mowing and maintenance, and the widespread use of herbicides in agriculture, residential gardens, and parks. And I think Maria Sibylla Merian, one of my favorite artists and entomologists from 1647 to 1717, said this so beautifully. The metamorphosis of the caterpillar has happened so many times. One is full of praise at God's mysterious power and the wonderful attention he pays to such insignificant little creatures. And if you look at the chrysalis, the green chrysalis at the top right of the composition, I use golden dots to encircle the chrysalis top there. And these are entry points for oxygen, essential for the butterfly's development. One morning in early December, a friend asked me to see what a chrysalis looked like. Among the 15 overwintering chrysalides, a single butterfly had pupated on a hydrangea stick placed in an antique bottle. I chose that one to show my curious friend. In late February, as I was checking my email, an exquisite swallowtail appeared walking across my keyboard. Absolutely mind-blowing to see this beauty in the middle of winter. I had not returned the chrysalis to the butterfly house in the cold outer room. What was I to do? It was too early to release her. Our native wild cherry was blooming, so I gathered large branches for the swallowtail and placed her in a small butterfly house my husband crafted for her of bamboo and a cardboard nursery garden tray and gauzy tarlatan fabric. I painted a number of watercolor portraits of this little female. These beauties have changed my life. Eastern black swallowtail, metamorphosis. Wind chimes, watercolor on paper. Autumn leaves fall. The garden enters its own slow, beautiful metamorphosis, aging, color transformation, a fading of the vitality of summer. October brings a magic show of brilliant hues as chlorophyll breaks down, making way for hidden pigments of red and gold. Our fox quietly skulks the brake of pines, causing, freezing, and watching, exploding in a mad futile dash as the young, inexperienced squirrel at the last possible moment reaches the safety of the sycamore. Higher up in the buttonwood, a red-tailed hawk stands silent, patient, waiting for a careless garden creature to make a mistake. Suddenly, we are startled as a falcon appearing from nowhere loops around the camellia, up and over the deck rail, bearing down on a fleeing junco at impossible speed. Matching the tiny snowbird's evasive maneuvers, turn for turn, wingbeat for wingbeat. The two of them inches apart, doubling back, disappearing once again in the camellias, leaving us to wonder as to the fate of the junco. What I've learned from our pollinator garden, like all gardens, each year is a little different, and sometimes there are surprises, and always there's more to discover. The joys of seeing plants flourish, of attracting an over-expanding variety of butterflies, bees, moths, and dragonflies, not to mention birds and larger wildlife, is so rewarding. In the last 12 months, pileated woodpeckers and scarlet tanagers have taken up residence in the neighborhood. I am obsessively researching new species both online and in the library. I find visiting public and private gardens especially enjoyable as they exude the same spirit of garden conservancy. And I love the palette of the autumn garden, where it's much more subtle and soft than the intensity of the summer greens. Autumn Rondelle. Autumn Rondelle captures the mood and the palette of the fall landscape. There is so much to discover each day in the garden, and most significant is the milkweed tussock moth with long brown and orange hairs that can cause a very itchy rash, and the green and brown saddleback caterpillar has a venomous sting that can cause severe pain and spread to nearby lymph nodes. Diversity in the garden is important for a healthy ecosystem, but it is also good to know and identify the many species of pollinating creatures. And we found that the number of bats in our garden at twilight this past summer was abundant, and the milkweed moth is one of their favorite foods. Ladybugs. Ladybugs, or lady beetles, are among the most effective destroyers of aphids, scale insects, and other plant-eating insects. Literally hundreds of aphids are consumed by a single ladybug to stoke the little fires of energy which she required to produce even a single batch of eggs. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I watched with delight as this tiny little ladybug stalked the aphid and quickly pounced and devoured the creature like a fox leaping on its prey. Every day, my garden reveals remarkable insights into the life and the wilds of my garden. She was just such a beauty that I gilded the background and created a medieval illumination of my little ladybug painting. Pasture thistle and damselfly, watercolor and glare on paper with gold leaf. The Cirsium discolor, or pasture thistle, appeared behind our white pines bordering on the bike trail that runs parallel to our property. I was looking for a native flowering plant for a medieval illumination workshop I was teaching at the U.S. Botanic Garden. This tall, stately thistle with pointed, spiny leaves and a curious mop of magenta and luminous rose madder flower head was translucent in the early morning light. The pasture thistle is a host plant to the painted lady butterfly and is attractive to monarchs, hummingbirds, and bees. I first created a 23-carat raised gold leaf border surrounding the thistle. The gilding process precedes the application of paint to ensure that small flecks of gold paint do not adhere to the painted surfaces. I then painted the thistle with thin translucent strokes using ground natural pigment mixed with glare and egg tempera. The damselfly wings were painted with pigment and shell gold. Winter Light, the Golden Hour, watercolor on paper. I painted this painting about 30 years ago for the winter solstice. Winter Light was inspired by the ephemeral rosy glow moments before twilight of the winter solstice. Early that day we had snow, and late in the afternoon the clouds pulled away to a rich, clear, low sun. Busy with preparations for dinner guests, I stopped to check that all was well with the dining table when a warm, transient light filled the room. I felt the physical presence of the light, the air and the space. Time stood still for just a moment. Then the light passed from the windows as the sun slipped behind the distant pines. I took note of the time, 3:52 p.m. The next morning, I reset the table from the previous evening and sketched the scene before me. Thankfully, there were several sunny late afternoons, and I painted this watercolor of the golden hour before the sun winked below the horizon. This painting is called Snow Flurries, and I'm painting on a very cold winter day. It began to sleet, so you can see some of the painting is sort of melted in the lower left part of the composition. When I brought it back to the studio, I hesitated and thought maybe I would add more detail, but I felt like the last marks were from nature, from the ice and rain, and so I left it. My journal has followed the seasons, as I am both a painter and a gardener. It begins and ends with this winter solstice. Darkness, massing of shapes and silhouettes, tonality, expressing the nakedness of the land, the bones and armature of the landscape. Winter, yo-yo ma playing Bach, the slow, dark shifting of branches, reed brushing against reeds, groaning, aching, moving towards the light. Charcoal, ground pigments, bits of silver tracing the bones and structure are perfect tools for expressing my thoughts and images. Painting is a journey, much the same way that migration is a journey. I choose the symbolic transcendence of the butterfly as my metaphor, the delicate structure with translucent wings, perfectly balanced in color and architecture, and her ability to travel 3,000 miles from Canada to Mexico each autumn to rest and reproduce. The Methuselah butterflies for their endurance and explicable abilities. If we were to paint like a butterfly, what would that be like? A revelation indeed. I'm a painter and a gardener. When I began writing Paint Like a Butterfly 25 years ago, my vision was to illuminate in words and paint the story of the monarch butterfly. This delicate creature weighing less than an ounce, traveling 3,000 miles without GPS, just pure instinct. Monarchs symbolize perseverance, hope, endurance, and the ability to overcome challenges in the face of adversity. Thank you all for joining me this afternoon as I share with you my extraordinary, ordinary garden. Thank you so much.
Oh, Jean, what an incredible journey you took us through. This was beautiful.
Thank you,
Thank
Corey.
you. Yeah, so we are at a place where we get to ask you questions,
Okay,
and
Rick.
we have a couple questions in the chat. So let's get started. I'm gonna start with, there's a participant in the chat. I think we all would like to hear just a little bit more about your parents.
Oh my goodness, my
Yeah,
parents.
about your parents. Yeah, I mean, and we do have questions about materials, and so we have a variety of things we
Oh,
can ask.
okay.
Yeah, let's just start with like the
When
history, your parents. Sure.
My parents, we moved to a piece of property in Severn when I was a little girl, and
Mhm.
we had 7 acres, but my parents sold off lots, so we just kept an acre and a half. My mom and dad had always wanted to have an organic garden. And so they took the magazine Organic Gardening from Rodale Farm in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. And when I was a little girl, and my brother, they took the two of us to Emmaus, Pennsylvania to see how the French raised gardening, organic gardening was started by the French in the 19th century, and it's a condensed gardening version. And so they did not use any. They composted everything. They took soil from different places. Like I said, we would go up to Chad's Ford, and they would go to Kennett Square and get the mushroom soil. And my dad believed that if you combine soils and the diversity of that, combining soils together gave you a much richer land and soil, which is the essence for everything. Soil is the essence of it all. If you don't have good soil, and you can add chemical fertilizers, but there's nothing like natural compost. And so they were both artists as well. Dad was a wood sculptor, and my mom painted some of his birds. And they just led a natural life. So our life was gardening and walking along the beach and just creating art and wood, and it was just one of the loveliest of lives. I was very, very thankful. Such wonderful.
Yeah, I can envision you, as a child, like happily drawing in your parents' garden for hours. Is that accurate? Or did your passion for plein air artistry kind of blossom later in life?
Thank you. Did you just ask, I mean, I didn't quite, did you ask me a question then with
I
that?
did. Oh no, yeah, yeah. So I can kind of envision. Let me actually make you a little
Oh,
bigger here. Yeah, there you go. I can kind of envision you, as a child, kind of drawing for hours in the garden. Is that accurate, or did this plein
it,
air artistry happen more later in life?
probably the plein air artist came later. I actually was riding horses on a farm and ponies
Oh
through
wow,
like a wild
yeah.
for many, many. But no, I always did love painting and drawing, but we were always getting shells and sculpting and making things and creating. So it was a very creative life. We went to
Yeah.
visited museums, and it was just a natural creative life for me. But yes, the plein air version probably became more in high school. And of course, in college at Maryland Institute College of Art, and then
Okay.
at George Washington.
Now, I
But that
heard you mention shell. Oh yeah, for sure. I heard you mention shell, and some of our participants would like to know what is shell gold.
I had, I just realized this is a mussel shell. And
Okay.
years ago, they would store in medieval, they didn't really have palettes, so medieval artists would store pigment, shell gold, and silver in these little shells. And just like we would have little pots of color or a palette of color, they would store them in these little shells. And gold leaf is actually created by beating gold to a very thin and airy quality and mixing it with gum arabic or another binder, and it
Mhm.
putting it in shells, and it would dry, and then you would use a brush. I mean, it was very dear and was hard to achieve this. So, you only used it on very, very important parts of a painting. So in medieval manuscripts, it might have been for a halo or for embellishments on a gown. So,
Yeah,
and
that
that's
that
Botanic Garden all those years. We would gather together 15 or 16 artists, and it was just the best experience. Everybody would bring their thoughts and ideas, and we'd share books and all the beautiful plants at the Botanic Garden. They were very, very happy years for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I mean, of course, we have folks in the chat like we loved hearing you teach, and we want more of it.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yes, of course. This will not be our last time with Jean. I can assure you of that. The pasture thistle and damselfly, right? And speaking of the mediums, you have a lot of fun. It looks like with different mediums to add that shimmer and texture. And then you just mentioned that there are certain pigments that you use only for like the most important parts. Are there other mediums that kind of deliver the goods better than others in botanic drawing?
egg tempera is a pigment that artists have used really since the beginning of time. When you think
Hmm.
of it, the pigments came from dry earth, and that's why I was saying that we use the same ochres. We call it yellow ochre or ochre or raw sienna, but
Yeah.
we still use those pigments. But binders, early binders, what would you have if you were in a cave dweller? You would use probably milk. Um, Woolly mammoth consomme. I mean, you would use the liquids that you would have as a binder, because unless you have a binder with a dry pigment, it will not adhere to a surface as a pigment. Now, egg tempera, I love teaching that class, and it is more complicated because you have to grind your pigments and you mix it with the egg yolk. But the quality of the pigment is lovely because it leaves a subtle luster, and it's what they call an eggshell luster to the painting. So instead of being a flat color, it doesn't look like a varnish, but if you look at it sideways, it has a beautiful subtle luster to it, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, we've been seeing, especially like your particular paintings with more of the pollinators. We have a question here that asks, that notices much of your work takes a very close look at creatures and phenomena that some folks might find scary or, gross, like the wasps, the cicadas, the larvae of parasitic wasps. How has art helped you appreciate nature in a new way? Or, help us find something that's kind of ugly to be beautiful?
Well, I think that we have to change our attitude because
Yeah.
these insects really, they pollinate our trees and our plants and our vegetables and our fruit trees. So it is important to be careful and think about, having a chemical-free environment. I
Hmm.
find that to be beautiful. And
Yeah.
as I'm studying them and painting them, and these were all natural specimens I either found in my garden or on our walks every afternoon with Zoe. And after a while, Harry said, "You really should be carrying a specimen box," because we would be coming up with our hands out flat like this, carrying, all
Yeah.
different swamp darners. So I think it is important for us to be careful, and they are really beautiful the more you study them. Maria Sibylla Marion says, these tiny little insignificant creatures and what they do for us. And she was raising butterflies and moths and understanding that back in the 17th century. So it
Wow.
goes on for many, many years and centuries.
Yeah, it seems to align with when you mentioned Rachel Carson's book as an inspiration, for your approach to gardening. And now those ideas also express themselves in works like when we saw the hornworm, right, and the parasitic. Tell us a little bit more about the hornworm and the what were the parasitic
The
worms
parasitic.
that were already gonna, yeah.
Well, the one thing is, and the other book I did not mention in this, but it is mentioned in my book,
Hmm.
is Pay Dirt, and that was by J.I. Rodale, and his farm originally was in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, but now it's in Kutztown, and you can visit it. It's a huge farm, and it's all organic, and I'm sorry, the question.
That's okay. Yeah, we were just curious because we see the concepts
Oh,
coming
yeah.
alive, in your art. Yeah, we just wanted to hear a little more about it. Hmm.
With that, I probably saw it as a child, but I think, you just see these huge fat worms and you're thinking, my gosh, they're devouring my tomatoes. And then I saw the little white pieces and investigating that. So it's always really good to investigate. I'm at the library once a week getting 5 to 10 books out of the library. So they know me very well. And also you can Google manifestations like that and you can acquire a lot of information. But before we want to rid or spray or something, it's very important to find out because the next morning that little caterpillar was just dried up like a little brown nut.
Look at
And,
that.
and the parasitic wasps had left, they had flown off. And so it was, and then we had our caprese tomato salad.
Ah, that is wonderful. Jean, this has just been so delightful. Before we close out today, I just wanted to let you know that there's some folks in the chat who are really admiring your dad's artwork back there, his sculptures. Uh, and we can also, we just want to know about timing. I know we're right at 12, but the snow, let me make sure that I have the right title here for snow flurries. We just got to know, how long did it take for you to do that outside?
Oh, I said I have to go out and start painting this, and I'll just make a quick study and maybe go out for 10 minutes to a half hour. I was out for a
Yeah.
couple of hours, and I
Wow.
really wanted those, and I was just enjoying the moment so much. It was probably 2 hours, but it was a
Okay.
quick sketch, and the
Yeah.
rain sort of finished.
This was lovely. Oh gosh, it was such a delight talking to you, Jean. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cor.
Thank you all for joining us today. We will do more with Jean. We're looking forward to it. We also have a survey for you online, so please let us know how we did today. And you all please enjoy your afternoon. Thanks again, Jean. Thanks, everybody.